Hi, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Break. I'm Nathan Willner with NCBA, and today I'm really excited. I have a good friend and colleague, Alison Walters, with us on our little coffee break show today. So instead of introducing you, Alison, since you have such uh, impressive resume, I'm going to let you just give a little bit of background about yourself and how you got involved in the creditors' rights industry and representing creditors.
Thank you for having me today. Again, name is Alison Walters, and I am a Florida attorney, but currently work for Markoff Law out of Chicago. I know that sounds a bit strange, and once we start talking today, you're going to be even more confused about why I'm here. But I got into creditors' rights like everyone else did. I sort of fumbled into it. I was very excited at the idea of being able to go to court right away. So, as a baby lawyer, having just passed the bar a few weeks before when I started interviewing, they said, you can go to court tomorrow. And that excited me. So that's really why I ended up in creditors' rights. But as Nathan indicated, I've been in this industry now for coming on 20 years, which sounds really crazy to say, and have been involved with NCBA for about 18 of those. I'm a former NCBA board member and still pretty involved in all the different committees.
So one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you today on the coffee break is to talk about your advocacy involvement and engagement with the court's rules committee, and especially in Florida. I was really impressed to hear the work you did, and I think that a lot of NCBA members and folks that have been part of the industry for a long time really don't know about that opportunity. So maybe talk about how you got involved in it, and then maybe we can kind of find out how it helped and what were the challenges.
Yeah, so Florida has a pretty detailed structure for applying to be on committees. And so when you fill out your renewal paperwork as a member of the bar, you can also ask to be assigned to certain committees. It's pretty open. And so the committee that the Florida Creditors Bar has become pretty involved in and tried to continue to have people on year after year is the Small Claims Rules Committee. And so right now in Florida, anything under $8,000 falls under the small claims rules. So it's a pretty, wide range, especially for NCBA members. And the Florida Creditors Bar actually sends out reminders on our listserv every year, like the application process is open for the Small Claims Rules Committee. Please make sure and sign up. And so that's kind of how I got involved in it. When we started back the Florida Creditors Bar Association about 15 years ago, from the beginning, we tried to get our members on that. So I would imagine that every state has some version of that. You may have to go and look for it a little bit. But being part of that process has been fascinating for the last few years.
Can you share like some examples of why having a seat at the table was so important, especially for people that do debt collection, litigation, and creditors' rights law? Uh,
Yeah, it's like many legislative things, right? Like it's sort of scary to see how the sausage is made, and that sort of fits. And so the ease or difficulty by which rules get proposed, get passed, and then get sent to the Supreme Court for approval, because that's sort of our process here, is craziness. So it's something as simple as someone that's on the committee can say, "Hey, I think we should change this." Or someone writes in and says, I'd like the committee to consider changing this. And so it could be something very minor, like the days for pretrial being set, it should be changed from 45 days to 50 days. And then, a committee meets and they discuss it and argue over it and, think of all the unintended consequences. But it really is based on who's on that meeting that day, right? And so if you have only consumer advocates as part of that process, or you only have people who never have been inside of a small claims courtroom, because that also happens. You may apply to be on, say, the Judicial Rules Committee, and they're like, well, you're not qualified for that. You've never served on another committee. And so the bar president sort of assigns you like a stepping ground. It does happen where there's people on this committee that have never been involved in a real small claims case. But there are certainly very practical things that happen. One of the more recent ones that we successfully got changed was if there was a non-service for a small claims pretrial that was docketed, not having to appear for the pretrial conference. And so that was a very practical rule change. It took a lot of time, and there were certainly some roadblocks. And if I'm being honest, there's some courts that still don't follow it. But we do know, in general, there's 67 counties in Florida, and most of the clerks in most of the courts are following it. And it really came down to it saving our law firms coverage counsel costs by not having to go to pretrials where no one is going to show up.
Yeah, and that's a great example because many times on these kinds of committees, it's the, big law, the large law firms, those types of attorneys who have extensive experience in, jury trials and in the, complex litigation, but really don't understand the kind of litigation that we do and that our members do. And just think about how many hours of wasted time you saved by just being on that committee for that one rule. That one, if that's all you did there, that was be worth it, and by the
Yeah,
time,
I will
the rules
say
are done.
in general, you're right in that most of the bar involvements on the committee levels are larger firms, right? Where
Yep.
people are being motivated because there's some sort of firm politics for why they're involved in the bar association with sort of a long-term growth plan for that. I think small claims, at least in Florida, it kind of sits outside of that because there's a practical reason why we want to be and need to be involved. The commitment level really varies depending on year to year. I mean, there certainly are some years that you're talking about 5 to 6 hours worth of meetings in the whole year. Obviously I had more than that in this last stint as chair. But I don't let the time commitment scare you. At least in Florida, the experience has been that it doesn't necessarily, it's not burdensome from a time commitment standpoint.
So what kind of strategies do you think NCBA members and those people that are uh, involved at the state level, which is so important, they can use to effectively influence, court rules committees to ensure that their voices are heard? What kind of strategies do you think folks should use?
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge any of the state creditors bar leadership to they should be the ones who maybe can take the lead to figure out what committees their members should be on, right? And make sure and disseminate that information to their members. So kind of to give the backstory that I alluded to in the beginning. So I've been a practicing Florida lawyer now, or a licensed Florida lawyer now for almost 20 years. But about 2 years ago, I joined Markoff, which, as many of you know, does not practice in Florida. And one of the caveats when I did that was, and does not, we don't have a portfolio or a line of business or anything in Florida either. One of the caveats to that was I told Steve, I was like, I still want to stay involved in the Florida Creditors Bar. Like, I'm kind of afraid if I don't stay involved, I'm not sure that it's going to continue to exist. And, it's important enough on a national level for us to still have a vibrant Florida Creditors Bar, that he's still willing and supporting me in doing all this, even though we have no business in Florida. But I definitely think the leaders of each state creditors bar association needs to find out what committees people need to be on, and then encourage their members, if not maybe even recruit their members to actually apply to be on those committees.
Yeah, that is, and it's true because what goes on in one state definitely impacts the others, especially when it comes to court rules. And, by the time we find out about it, it's too late. In other words, by the time it's in a rule, you're really behind the eight ball.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I would even argue by the time the rules proposed, I mean, Florida does have comment. So it goes through these committees, the smaller committees, then it goes to the actual small claims rules committee, and then it gets proposed up to the Supreme Court. When they then put the rule out, they do open the rule up for comments for a certain period of time, and then they consider it. I imagine most states have some sort of similar process. The reality is, at that point, they've generally made up their mind. And if it isn't a controversial rule, it's usually going to go through. And so the time to have input, much like it is in the legislative affairs type stuff that NCBA is working on nationally, I mean, the time to have input is before it gets drafted in the
yeah,
very early stages.
yeah, and that's why I think it's so great the work that you're doing, and that other advocates, that people that know about court rules committees and get involved in benchmark committees, it's critical because we can talk about policy and ideology, but when the rubber meets the road, what's going to control your day-to-day operations is really court rules and that really shouldn't be overlooked. So I know
Yeah.
we're getting to the end of our cup of coffee, so to speak, and I hope you will agree to come back and talk more with me about state advocacy and creditors bars throughout the country that really make a difference. So final words for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I will say, if anyone, if this is all sounding new to someone and they're like, how do I figure out what this is? I don't pretend to know about what's going on in the other states, but certainly willing to brainstorm some ideas that have come through the committee that worked or that didn't work, or things that were proposed that we figured out how to maybe stop from going through that would make our lives more difficult. Always open, to help that, to try and prevent all of your lives from getting more complicated than we already have them.
All right. Well, Alison Walters, thank you so much for joining us today and keep up the great work. It is really appreciated throughout the country. So thank you so much. Have a great
Thanks.
day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.